Cool. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Riaz Varani. I'm a freelance web developer. I also work on a startup that me and a friend of mine are starting soon called Hybrid Hero. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And if at the end of this presentation, there's other things that you are interested in, you want to see that I've talked about or written about, you can see all that at riazv.me. But today we are going to talk about web extensions. I'm specifically saying web extensions because Chrome extensions obviously are the ones that we're all most likely most familiar with that are most popular. But it turns out you can actually work across browsers, and almost all the browser implementations support some form of extension format. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But I want to also preface this with a specific goal that I have. My goal today isn't to give you like a fully detailed version of all the nuances of how to write an extension. I mean, you can go look at reference docs yourself. But I wanted to kind of inspire you to look beyond maybe what you might have to do in your day-to-day by building a regular web application that's in a standard browser context and realize that you can do a lot of other things with JavaScript. I've written other talks about how you can write stuff with hardware or stuff with even Alexa skills or Google Home skills. So at the end of the day, if you feel like, man, I can do something new with the skill sets I might already have as a web developer, then we have succeeded today. So first of all, let's be very specific when we say what a web extension is and what it isn't. Some of you might be familiar with, like in the old days, we had things like Adobe Flash or Java applets, which were things that were not actually part of the browser, but kind of hooked into the browser to enhance it because you didn't really have all the capabilities we do now within the browser today. Extensions are different. Extensions are actually built into the browser. They're actually an enhancement of the browser code supported natively by the browser itself and not really a third-party applet or some other tool like that. So, and if you want to look at the browser, when I mean extensions, again, it's that those sort of applications that you can install that are in that corner, right? So that's where all of your extensions live. They might be in a different place if you're using a non-Chromium based browser. But if you're using Edge, if you're using Chrome, if you're using, Opera, any sort of Chromium based browser, it's going to be in the same spot. Well, let's talk about history real quick. Since when have we had these extensions? And it turns out, well, again, we all think of Chrome extensions most likely. The first implementation of sort of an extension-like format was actually Internet Explorer back in 1999. Now, it looked very different than the way that we write extensions today. And then that was followed by Firefox in 2004, Opera in 2009. And then it was actually 2009, 2010 when we actually got what we really think of as modern extensions in the sort of Chromium ecosystem. And then Safari added a sort of its own thing in 2010. And then Edge in 2016 had its own model as well. And then now Edge essentially today, because Edge essentially rewrote itself to be just a Chromium-based browser 2 years ago and sort of Microsoft dropped its own implementation. Now it's just any Chrome extension will work inside of Edge. The other kind of key marker that's sort of an interesting trivia point is that you actually didn't exclusively use web tech to write Chrome extensions until Chrome did it in 2009, 2010. Like they were the first ones to say, oh, you can use the skills you already have. You don't need to learn some sort of other language or format or technology to be able to do it. Some of the other ones were sort of hybrids. And basically, the reality was everyone was doing their own implementation for the longest time of how to implement extensions. So this is the great thing and the bad thing about browsers in general, right? As web developers. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
We will.
Okay. Ania, can you turn off the vacuum? Sorry. Our automated robot vacuum starts up at noon, and it just turned noon here right now. So it just turned on. Let me go turn it off. You got it? Okay. Cool. Years of COVID and working from home. But anyways, essentially, whatever we get sometimes can go away, right? The browsers give us a thing that works, but essentially not all the implementations are compatible. And this is sort of the constant the debate and the challenge that we have as web developers. So it turns out at the end of the day, they all did their own thing, but Chrome really owns the extension market. And we all think of extensions, we think of Chrome extensions. And it was finally back in 2015 that the browser vendors just said, all right, this is not working. like no one's using our own implementations. Let's just all centralize on one. And there was a committee started in 2015 by the W3C, which is a global standards body for almost all of our HTML, CSS, JavaScript kind of specifications. Well, JavaScript's a little bit different. And they kind of spurred them to start working to standardize. And for the most part, in 2015 for Firefox, 2017 for Edge, and then most lately in 2020 for Safari, they standardized on sort of essentially adopting what Chrome did. Now, Chrome threw a bit of a wrench in this literally last year, where they said, I guess 2 years ago, where by the time everyone standardized on what Chrome did, which they called Manifest v2, Chrome said we're throwing it out. Like Google was just like, no, we're starting over. Like they pulled an Angular and like just literally threw out the whole model. They're now forcing everyone to use what's called Manifest v3, which is a whole different system of how to do an extension entirely. And Firefox is just like, well, we're just figuring out how to do v2. So is Safari, and Edge will follow whatever Google does, because essentially it's a Chromium-based browser. So we kind of got some standardization, and now we're kind of back to a mess again. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a second later on in the presentation. Well, that's enough history and context. How do I actually make one, right? And I want to give you just the preliminary, like how simple it is if you just wanted to get started, and we're going to do one together. Well, it turns out, by the way, that you already almost all will know how to. If you've been writing anything in sort of a web context, the primitives that you need to understand to build a web extension, in our case for Chrome, is you just need to know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Every time you're running a Chrome extension, behind the scenes, it's not doing anything in the C layer where the browser's written. It's simply running those things. And then on the JavaScript side, the browsers expose essentially these new APIs that you can do to like open tabs and take screenshots, etc. So you already know how to do all this. Now, it turns out nowadays, right, like when we say, oh, just use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, like most people are like, yeah, I'm not doing that. What actual framework do I use? Do I need to use React or Angular or Vue or, or really a JS, whatever the hell it is? Well, there isn't one. So like, there's just not a thing. I mean, there's boilerplates you can use to get started. But like, there's no sort of like default, like use extension JS to write your thing. And it kind of helps you organize all this together. Part of it, again, being everything's really fragmented amongst the different browsers. But having said that, it's not that you can't use some of those tools, right? Like for me, like having generally written a lot of React most recently, you can use React, Webpack, ES6, and all that. Again, by default, if you just use plain JavaScript, you don't even get import statements, right? You kind of do, but if you're importing from like a node package, like you don't have a packager to put it together and know where to look for it. So you'll have to kind of build your own build system or find a boilerplate that's kind of rigged it for you. At the end of the day, all the Chrome extension cares about is that you're packaging up essentially a manifest declaration file with in HTML and or JavaScript files, like your static output. Now, this is not that new. If you're even using Create React app or something like that, at the end of the day, all these build systems are dumping to like a distribution directory that's actually being pushed to the internet. So you just have to have a way to do that yourself. So how do you actually get it out there? Now, if you're in the world of web development, you have 1,000 ways to host things. You can essentially go and even just get a static file server and put up a web server pretty easily, right? There's a really good tools to let you put your stuff on the internet, that everything from the modern Netlify stuff all the way back to just a simple server, upload some files, you're good to go. Well, deployment here is not as freeform. And by the way, this image in the center, this is the most funny. This is not a real image. I constructed this image. This is like this is the most artistic I get to get. But obviously you can notice that not all the lines of the bricks are aligned. But it's a walled garden. So you think more similarly to how, let's say, iOS or Android app deployment works. You don't just say, I have an extension, put it up online, anyone can get it. All of the browser vendors, so Google, Firefox, Apple, and Microsoft, like run like an online store, like an app store, and you have to create an account with them. You might have to register with them, pay them a fee. There is a small fee even for the Chrome one of like $5 or $10 or whatever, verify identity. and then you have to package it in a way that they want you to package it and submit it to them, and then they have to review it and approve it. And if you want to make updates to it, you have to submit your update and they have to review it and approve it. So it's not like a free-for-all in the same way that a website might be. And sometimes this gets really complicated. In fact, this is actually the more complicated part, even compared sometimes to writing the extension. In the world of Safari, they did in 2020 with not this most recent version of Mac OS, but with the previous version. They said, okay, the way they want you to do this now is to like use Xcode to do this like Swift JavaScript extension thing together so that like your extension can run both on iOS and on the desktop browser. And it's really freaking complicated and no one's doing it. And if you want to go look up, there's just all these articles about how like this is not really working. So they kind of adopted the way of writing the extension from Google and from Chrome, but the deployment process is a mess. And even for Google, you have to upload a zip file. Like you have to figure out how to like make them a zip file or a tarball and give it to them. So it's not as seamless as you might imagine. Basically, if you're going through this process, expect to have some hurdles. So now we'll get to some show and tell, which the part I like. I know in presentations, it's like, don't ever do live coding. And I totally get that, but it's just not fun for me. Where again, I want to see something break. I want to see something work. I want to walk you through the journey that you're going to be going through if you try to do this yourself. So the journey we're going to go through is we're going to write initially the simplest extension, which is just a manifest file, a background file that actually has the JavaScript. And we're just going to take a page and make it red in the background, hence the background. And then we're going to load it into a browser and we're going to see it work. And so this is something you can follow along with if you want to, or just watch, and it should be pretty easy to follow along. And then after that, I'm going to show you an extension I wrote that's not major, but is a meaningful extension that does something more real. And I'll just kind of show you the primitives of how I structured it. And you can kind of see like how you can relate to that from a web background if you're coming from that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to move this over. So I made a profile that I just created, a new Chrome profile that's empty. So if you were starting out, the first thing you need to do is go to the extensions page inside of your Chrome setup. And this is probably what we've seen before if you want to enable, disable, add other extensions. And the top right, there'll be a little toggle here called developer mode. So you check that and you'll see some new options. So now obviously you can inspect the pages these are running on, even extensions you already have. Sometimes it's kind of interesting to see what the hell these extensions are doing. Additional details, you can view other stuff about the permissions, how it's handling errors, even for existing extensions. But you get you get another part up here that says you can load unpacked, pack extensions, or update. So we're going to use the load unpacked in a second. But first, we need to make our extension. So I use this tool. You can use any tool that you want to sort of be able to edit code. I use RubyMine because I'm mostly write Ruby most of the time. So anyways, we have just a directory. There's nothing in it. And we are going to make a file called manifest.json. I'm going to make this a bit bigger. Yeah, so you guys can see. And we're going to add really the most basic things that you need in here to get this to work. So, and this is something that has to be included in every extension, really from every vendor. Let's call it demo. And now you have to declare an action, even though we're not going to put any action in there. Action can be like open, if you ever see an extension where you click on it, it opens a pop-up window. That's where you would declare it here, but we're not going to do that in our extension. Manifest version 3. Now we talked earlier about like how manifest version 2 is the one that essentially almost all the extensions you're using nowadays are using manifest version 2. Manifest version 3 is what Google just started a year ago and is like pushing on everyone. And no one else except for a Chromium-based browser would be able to really accept version 3. You do have to declare a version. This is just required. So whenever you update it, you have to push up to a newer version when you push to like any of the online stores. Otherwise, it'll say you can't go backwards. So we're going to need 2 permissions. And this is pretty important because all of your extensions run in sort of a sandbox, and to say what you're allowed to do with the page, like if you have a password manager extension or whatever, they may need more permissions to read the page, modify it, etc. we're going to ask for these two permissions. And if you go look in the reference guides, you can look at the permissions, and it's actually an interesting way to learn about all the kinds of extensions you can build. And then we'll need this worker. JS. So this is actually the thing that we're going to have that's going to do all the work, which is a file that's running in the background and can basically handle the clicks that we are going to put onto the extension button. So let's make that file now. And in this file, we are simply going to add a function called redin. Okay, it's bigger for you guys again. Body style background. All right, now here is where we're going to get to use some of the sort of magic stuff that's being added onto the context by Chrome to allow us to actually interact with the page. Wrote that very fast. Let me swing back over it. Redin page background color on click, have tab, execute the script that runs the function redin page on that target. That seems about right, but obviously, first time I write something, it's unlikely to work. So let's just go here. We will load that unpacked extension. The right folder. Boom. Now, the reason we don't have a special icon is we didn't declare an icon in the manifest file, but there is a way you can declare icons and have them locally here so that it'll pull, a custom image. But anyways, let's see if this works. So we'll just go to like, and the extension is here. I'll just pin it so we can see it. Boom. Background became red, right? So that's it. And like we're literally modifying the DOM on the page that we were on with literally 3 minutes of code, right? So think of all the other crazy things you can do with that for use case for your customers or even internally to your own team. I want to show you a couple other things just from a sort of developer ergonomics perspective. So it's like, great, it worked. What if I want to make changes and iterate, right? So like, what if I like really need this to be blue? Well, turns out if you go back here and rerun it, it's still red. Why is that? Well, it doesn't auto reload. Like even if your build system auto builds all this stuff, or you just change the file and save it, you have to hit the reload button here, or you have to hit update here for it to grab the newest code. So if I hit reload, you can see it kind of hit reloaded. And then if I come here now and hit it, turns it blue. So there's just no way around that. If you're in sort of development mode, you have to continue to hit the reload button every time you make a change to have it reflected in the browser. Another thing I wanted to show you was that, debugging, right? Well, where is the console? So it's right here, by the way, especially for the sort of long running service workers. So you can, for example, like use console.log. You have to reload again. And if you come here, there, and then hit the button. There we go. Yeah, so it does show up. And you can even do debugger statements. That'll also work if you're a debugger type programmer. So you could do. So when I was writing my last Chrome extension, there's just like a lot of clicking compared to like, you think of how smooth it is with the hot reloading with like a lot of, Angular, Vue, React, whatever nowadays. It's a lot of clicking around whenever you're doing development. for Chrome extensions. You will need to have the service worker open. Click on here. You can see it's paused, where we can, inspect Chrome object, Chrome action, whatever we want it to do. If I close it, it works. Yeah, so that's one thing I wanted to show you. Now, everything that we just wrote, after all the promises of the browser vendors being like, we're going to be really good and we're going to standardize this stuff, this will not work in Safari because we have to do that complicated boot up Xcode and load this into Xcode to get it to work and like package it in a different way. So you essentially have to become a Mac developer to do it. Firefox doesn't support this V3 specification yet. However, simultaneously, starting in January, if you say, no, I'm just going to go with V2, forget what Google's doing, Google will stop allowing you to submit new V2 extensions just next month. So like Firefox won't accept one, but Google will only accept the new. And then I think in 2023, Google said they're not even going to let them work anymore. Like they're all going to stop working, all the V2 extensions. So there's a little bit of churn here again that can be kind of painful if you want to write cross-browser extension. But if you just want to write it for Chrome, you're kind of good to go. Just use the V3 specification, and then you'll be able to get to use the other browsers when the other browsers catch up. Now, Firefox has said they will get to V3. There's just an indefinite timeline on that because they put out a blog post saying this is a major change, and like we don't agree with all of the little details of all the changes that Google's made. By the way, the big reason they did V3 was that the V2 specification is very insecure. And I will say this, after learning about this, scared the shit out of me. Like if you are using Chrome extensions, be very discerning about which ones you're using, because they can do a lot more than you think without your understanding. And that's even why Google has a trusted, has a program where they will essentially like tell you if they don't think the creator of your extension is trustworthy, and sometimes even pulls extensions, which I've seen happen to like one of my favorite extensions because they get so much power over your browser. So don't just install them like, candy and just have fun with them. Be very discerning with the extensions you install. But this should get a lot better with V3. The security model is much tighter. So final thing I wanted to show you guys is I wanted to kind of pull up a extension that was not just sort of a trivial extension. I'm just going to show it to you real quick, and I want you to get a sense of like, here's what one looks like when you actually have the things you're going to want to have, like a build system, and you want to actually have the ability to use ES6 modules and write things in a, not just a simple one kind of one file setup. So I wrote this one a while back called Listery. It is real. It was just there for me to learn how to write Chrome extensions, so I'm not really plugging it. But if you want to use it, it is live. You can use it. So I'm just going to make it so it appears here. It's this icon. Essentially, all it does is it's a way, if you're like working with a team and you're trying to annotate something, you click on it, it opens this little thing while it's taking a screenshot, opens a new page, and then you can annotate it by being like, or more realistically, you're like, use a lighter blue, copy the link, give it to your friend, and now your friend can see your notes on whatever page you marked up. So that's what it does. It's essentially a really quick annotation page if you want to be able to. Now, what the Chrome extension does in this case, this interface is a React app that's being hosted at this URL. But when I clicked on here, essentially the Chrome extension, when I was opening that little window, that little pop-up is part of the Chrome extension. It's taking a screenshot, uploading it, and then navigating you to this page, right? So that's what the Chrome extension is doing fundamentally. So this is the code for that extension. Now, with a build system, at the end of the day, your build system, in order to load it locally or for your final build, has to result in a folder of stuff you're going to package into that zip file and give to Google or whatever as your extension. That's these distribution directories. At the end of the day, there's still a manifest.json. Again, it's still pretty primitive. It just has icons and says, hey, whenever the action, whenever you click, is to open this pop-up, and that pop-up does the rest of the work. That pop-up, at the end of the day, is this thing. Oh, I should show you the one that's not compiled. Yeah, it has a loader or an error. This is a thing with this parser loader to kind of help me break this out visually, so I don't have one big file. And then the actual JavaScript file is loaded as a part of that HTML file and does this very basic thing, right? says it uses the magic API to capture the tab you were on. It uploads the base64 version of that image to an image hosting service, and then hits my backend API to say track that the screenshot was created, and then navigates you to the page to the edit URL that came back as a result of a call to my backend API. And then you've got all these separate files, again, very conventional to how you would use separate files and imports and exports, and that's all being orchestrated together by it's just scripts in a package.json. So if I even ran the dev version, I copy the static files, which again, the manifest.json, the logo, the icons, those are all static. So they just kind of be copied to this output directory. And then I use the parcel builder to essentially grab this index file and then finish out by putting it into the dist-dev directory. And so when I'm loading the Chrome extension locally, I tell it to load from this distribution directory here. So you can still get all your niceties. You can still get all the things that you're used to. It's not given to you. You have to kind of, if you want to use, in this case, I want to have different configurations for different environments, I have to hook that up myself with the parcel loader. If I want to use post CSS, I have to hook that up myself. The build system is not really given to you. So, any other notes? No, I'm going to. That's the conclusion coming out. It's my favorite ending GIF. All right, that's all I got. Any questions?
I have a few questions, but maybe first, people from the audience, attendees, want to ask questions about extensions development. Okay, so I'm curious to know, is there a way to develop an extension that includes code developed in C, C++? Is there a way to do it?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is. And this is actually not just an extension thing. There's a way to essentially like ship C binding. So whatever limitations you have in general in the browser are there. There is a way where you can essentially like even use something like WebAssembly to kind of run a C compiler, or you can do what's called like, I forget the name. It's like NACI, something like that. But it's not unique to extensions. It's the same approach you would have to use if you're using a regular browser.
No, WebAssembly is less interesting. I'm talking about C and C++, for instance.
Yeah, so there's nothing specially provisioned that allows you to do it, to my knowledge, in an extension. So there's sort of ways to do that when you're talking about even a browser page. They're kind of complicated, but there's nothing special that would enable you to do that in extension. You're simply getting a plain V8 browser context that you get to execute against.
And anyone can do it, or should I go through a specific process, get approval?
Oh, there's no like special approval. I think it's at the end of the day, you still have to ship an extension to any of the web stores, and so they'll review it and approve it. But the APIs that are available to you are not unique because you're in a browser, a web extension context. Does that make sense? Like if you can do it on a web page and you can find a way to do that, which I think I've heard that there are some ways to do that, then you can do it. But there's not like the extension doesn't do anything separately. It's just essentially to the browser, it's another web page. And none of the special Chrome APIs enable, to my understanding, anything that would allow you to specifically do to add C extensions differently than a regular browser page.